Good afternoon and welcome to Bordeaux Unpicked, latest podcast update from Corney and Barrow, where we're delving into obviously the 2024 vintage. We're in our new premises, and just for a bit of a backstory, we've had to take our gilets off because they were making too much rustling for our recording sounds, and so we are sans gilet for this podcast too. And I think moving forward, we will have to be within our new temporary office premises. Anyway, enough of the backstory. Let's move into let's start with Rocheyron. Rocheyron 2024, the beautiful Saint-Emilion property from Peter Sisseck. It was my first visit, which I think I mentioned on a previous pod.
Yeah, weird. I hadn't realised you hadn't been.
I know. Well, I just don't get invited to these sort of
We need someone to drop.
these soirees.
Come this year.
You were in the B team last year, I think, weren't you? So
I'm probably Z team. I've had
Z-class.
to work my way up the alphabet since 2010. Yeah. Anyway, so I loved it. Really charming property, and I believe Peter's probably only just really finished the sort of the slight touches of renovation refurb recently. Is that right?
Yeah,
You've seen it?
it's pretty modest, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very
So
modest.
it's
Yeah.
all a house, but it's got everything that it needs winemaking wise, and the most important thing is where it is. So,
Yeah.
no, it's good.
it's got cellar. The cellar is new, so I mean they did renovate that totally and built it from scratch. So that is a new addition, but it was done a few years ago now. So.
Yeah, and there's also on the cellar front, he's got his sort of wine bottle cellar as well, which I thought was quite cool. Quite modern style. It was
Oh, in the
the
house,
glass door.
yeah.
Yeah, in the house. I love that. So we just followed Peter, and in we went. A little bit of a chit chat, and then I think Guy and I went and stuck a load of bottles under our arms and took them upstairs up a spiral staircase to his tasting room. And we tucked into the 24. So, but look, let's start with a bit of background. Guy, I don't know if you want to kick us off, because obviously you've visited more than any of us. Well, actually, probably similar to you, Will, to the estate at Rocheyron. It's something that we started work, with Peter. 2010 was the first vintage, although he didn't have full control over that. And now we're 14 years down the line, where he has implemented his changes throughout the vineyard and certainly through the winemaking processes, and found his feet, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I agree with all of that. And what else can I add? Now, we have been working with Peter since the very beginning, as you say, in 2010. He obviously made his name in Ribera del Duero in Spain and created this phenomenon that is Pingus. And so is very much known for that. But he really started his winemaking career in Bordeaux. He was working with his uncle, Peter Vending-Deers, and his kind of early days as a winemaker were in Bordeaux, and so I think he very much feels at home there. And it was always an aim and a desire to come back to Bordeaux and to make something great in particularly the right bank of Bordeaux, which he's very fond of. Peter's winemaking career can be seen in a way as a sort of quest for limestone expression. So he's very, very keen on these limestone vineyards and really getting the best expression of that texture and that sort of nervy minerality. And that's, in a sense, what Pingus has been all about. And you can see his recent foray into Fino Sherry down in the south of Spain as similarly a sort of exploration of those kind of chalky sort of textured soils. And so Rocheyron, right on the edge of the limestone plateau of Saint-Emilion, based in the very cool soil village of Saint-Christophe-des-Bardes. It's only a few kilometers from central Saint-Emilion, but it really feels like you're almost in a different neck of the woods altogether. It's very bucolic, it's very countryside, and you could be forgiven for driving past it without noticing it was there almost. It's a wonderful site. So it's a very modest chateau building with, as we've said, a very functional but modern and nicely done cellar. The vineyards are pretty much contiguous. There's a block of old Cabernet Franc, which sort of forms the central part of it. And then there is Merlot going around the outside of that. Peter has a team there, Mathieu Ravero, who's been there since the beginning, since the 2010 vintage. He's a good guy. He's been sort of promoted to regisseur a few years ago, and he's very much the man on the ground there and is there year in, year out. So he's looking after the day-to-day running of the estate, and Peter keeps a very close eye in conjunction with Mathieu. But that's the setup, and I mean organics has always been central to what they're doing there. They are now also certified biodynamic. They got that certification in 2023, so this is their second biodynamic vintage. That is a theme which runs through Peter's estates elsewhere and very much central to Pingus.
It's
Nice.
pretty challenging time to be biodynamic.
Yeah.
But I mean, Nev, who very rudely Mr. Muller didn't introduce you at all.
I was just
Obviously,
about to say that.
Oh, were you right?
Absolutely classic.
Classic
I think
Muller.
1 in 5 podcasts I might do
I
that.
think Mr. Muller, ever since he was left out of the selection one week, he's got slightly more aggressive and vengeful about things. Anyway, Nev, you've joined the team more recently than us three older hands. So what's been your sort of take on Rocheyron?
Well, I was very fortunate to go there in 2022
Yep.
when we did the campaign, and it was good. It was the end of a sort of very long day's tasting, I believe, when we got to Rocheyron, and Peter greeted us with a glass of Vina Corrales, which was very much welcome at that point.
Yes, I remember.
Which was good. But yeah, no, I mean Rocheyron, as I say, it's a pretty modest. It's a pretty modest setup. But I remember there being a lot of bird life going on in the vineyards of Rocheyron. So for the twitchers amongst you, you should very much put that on your trail of Bordeaux. But no, honestly, in all seriousness, it was actually quite interesting. I mean, there's lots of all the rows sort of full with lush cover crop and butterflies, bugs, birds. It was sort of one of the things that I remember very distinctly from walking alongside. You sort of walk past Peter's house and then up the side path up to the winery, and yeah, it's it was there was a lot going on. But no, I mean, in terms of what the wines are like, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, before I joined Corny & Barrow, I hadn't really tasted any Rocheyron, and so when I got here, I think the thing that struck me most, actually similarly about the wines of Pingus as well, is kind of how hands-off they are, really. There's a sense of transparency, power for sure, but I think the thing that I think Peter's managed to absolutely nail with Rocheyron is this completely transparent translation of the limestone profile of Saint-Emilion. And there are certain estates that kind of some of the grand estates of Saint-Emilion, like Cheval Blanc and all the rest of it, that kind of you associate with that. But I can't remember tasting a Saint-Emilion, particularly in the cooler vintages like 17 and 21, where you get this absolutely kind of pure mineral tension in the wines, which I'm a huge fan of. So I'm enjoying them. I'm enjoying them a lot. And I think the road from 2010, which is, I mean, it's weird to say that somebody's 2010 is sort of, not sort of massively of interest, if you know what I mean. But I mean, Peter's road from 2010 to present day, I think is pretty extraordinary. I mean, you see a quality jump from, I think, 15 for me is when it starts to get really serious. Although I do love the 14, I must say, from Peter. But I mean, there is a quite big incremental leaps each year, right?
Yeah, and I did. I think that, and Guy mentioning, you've just picked up on it brilliantly, that limestone thread which that runs through the wine, which is obviously the mission of Peter's sort of vinous quest, and certainly he's conquered a few regions with it. That's so apparent in the 24, and I loved that.
Yeah.
And again, not to sort of reiterate something that we mentioned on another pod. It was a little while ago, but he served 2023 afterwards to us, Rocheyron 23, which is, I think that's quite courageous to do so, because
one of the only people who did.
Yeah. And the 23, as you can expect, had that flamboyance of fruit sort of running through there, and a real juiciness to the fruit. Where the 24, I had that sort of more floral. It's a sort of a fresher vintage, as we've discussed, lower sort of alcohol. The fruit was very much there, very bright sort of cherried style. But the thing that really made a big difference to the sort of the style of the wine was that limestone became so much more apparent through the 24 because of it. Where on the 23, it will come round, obviously, but it's sort of slightly submerged, a bit like the wine under a cap in a vat, where that limestone was just underneath the fruit in 23. And texturally, that's going to take time to really sort of find its way.
But I think that's the really cool thing about a lot of, I mean, Peter's a great example of it. But so a lot of estates that have a good chunk of Cab Franc in the blend.
Yeah, 20%.
Is it providing in a cool vintage, say like 17, 21, 24, providing you can get your Cab Franc ripe, it is an amazing translator of limestone soils and mineral profile in general.
Yeah.
And I think it's weirdly something to look out for and follow a little bit through this campaign, is that if everybody got the Cab Franc ripe, the Merlot gives you that little bit of density that makes it feel like right bank Bordeaux. But that florality and that kind of that detail that you get with ripe Cab Franc in a cool vintage is quite lovely.
Can I ask a quick question for you? I know you want to jump in. So you've obviously tasted the Rocheyron not long ago. We tasted the estate. So a question for you, Nev. Were you surprised by the 24 Rocheyron versus other 24s you've tasted? And if so, or if not, why or why not?
Yeah, so I think the thing that did surprise me was, I say, Cab Franc is a feature of the wine, and it all, in a cool vintage, it's not always a guarantee that your Cab Franc's going to be ripe. And that's the thing that I really enjoyed about Rocheyron this year, is that it's completely ripe, and there's just a real energy and freshness about the wine. It's of course on the leaner side, but for people that are drinking, it's an overused phrase, Burgundian, but like for people who love drinking Burgundy and love the kind of limestone character of elegant red Burgundy, I think Saint-Emilion in general in 2024 is just an area that I think people will get a lot of joy out of.
You often can't say that, because it's often one of the more mixed communes, because it's, I think, France's largest commune, funny enough. And certainly in terms of number of chateaus and things, it probably is. But I agree with your 17 comment. I know I'm 2/3 of the way through a 6-pack of 17 at home, and it's drinking beautifully. And I think it'll be on that model. I mean, other things we had, I think we also had the 16 while we were out there on one lunch, and Peter bought a Magnum of 12. Now 12's only his third vintage, but that Magnum of 12 we had was absolutely delicious. And it's probably a wine that's plusher in mags than maybe in bottle, but 16 was a D mag, bigger at that lunch. But yeah, I think the wines are really character, and the fact that Peter has done, and it's sort of the elephant in the room, is always priced with 2024, but he's brought it down at the price that means that we've also been able to work hard to bring it out at the lowest en primeur price it's ever been, even going back to the heady days of the market for the 2010 Bordeaux's or anything. So at 300 pounds a 6-pack, I think it's a really great drink. And I think it will be one of the examples, a little bit like I'm drinking 17 now, that isn't going to need crazy amounts of time, because I think that energy goes through it. And so I think it's I'm biased, but it's a cracking wine to buy. And I think at that price,
yeah, I agree. And in terms of quantity, it's just worth mentioning that he usually produces around 20,000 bottles. He's only made 13,000 bottles this year. So, I mean, it's a smaller vintage. The yield was actually pretty good, but then he did some quite savage sorting, as you would expect. So it's no expense spared in terms of production values.
Peter's always been fair with pricing, whichever property you look at.
He's pragmatic.
Yeah, he is. He's pragmatic, and he's done it with on several occasions where he's readdressed when it needs to be. But there's also, just very finally, just because I wanted to get this point across, which you touched on, Nev. You said the word elegance, and this was one of the small amount of tasting notes where I've underlined elegance and poise, because you didn't find that in a huge amount of 24s at all. And for me, for some reason I just wrote a comment where it said it was a gentleman with subtle presence, and that it had all the class that you would like to have seen in
you didn't tell us before we went out that you were going to the caricature of your wine, but it seems to have been what you've done. Is it just a way of fleshing out your book so that it looks like you've written a long tasting note by describing their personality?
Well, no, because you've tasted so much, you've got to try and get some distinction in some way.
I want to see where the sort of psychopath or bipolar and all this sort of stuff comes out. But anyway, let's not talk about.
We'll talk about them in the update in a moment.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the update. So perfect segue.
On that note, okay. So Rocheyron is out. Yeah. So get in touch. Have a good chat with us about it. The wines are very much in the camp of for a 20. If you're buying 24s, you simply need to have a case of that.
Yeah.
Big name this week, the Clarence Dillon stable came out. So Haute Brion, the second wines, and La Mission, and the second wines and the whites. So we've had a bit of a okay response customer wise. It hasn't stacked up to so far in terms of orders and business that we had with certainly Lafitte and Mouton. But I think that's probably to do, Hope came out at £720 a 3, the cheapest first growth. Margot, for some reason, and I have no idea, I can't work it out, decides they want to come out on the 2nd of June. So we are going to be doing an update at some point well into June on that. But it's certainly the cheapest of the first growths. And the price of Hope was good. You can just about find some 21 around. So it does pretty much come in to the cheapest in the market. Clarence, if we're being honest, it just doesn't seem to work. The price they've come out, 510 a 6. The market doesn't seem to find it has traction the way Petit Mouton does, or the way Carawad does, where it sort of holds it at a certain value. There is a plethora, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, you can just go there.
And without being crude, you can buy 9 bottles of Combo Brun.
Well, this is what I was going to come on to,
Why would you? But also, I think we have to be from a sort of integrity up front point of view and say that we didn't taste the Haut-Brion stable terribly well. I loved the whites. You were less sort of keen on them, but whether it was because we were early, we were there on the Thursday or the Wednesday or Thursday before the week started the following week. Other people and some of the press and things have written the Haut-Brion wines up very well, and they featured in top 10s and things like that. And that it may well have been either us as tasters or the samples or who knows what. But we didn't taste the wine as well as others seem to have done. So that's, as I say, probably more our fault or the sample.
No, indeed.
Well, it's the wine. But
it may have actually been influenced. When we went to Haut-Brion, the first bottle they poured us was oxidised. So it wasn't off to a great start.
We had this one, obviously, which they swapped straight away. But,
of course they did, but yeah, you're right. I mean, in terms of characters, that was the sort of Jekyll and Hyde of the vintage, where potentially Mr. Hyde was lurking more for me in those wines. They were quite bitter.
Back onto your caricatures. Yeah.
It's a shame, really, though, because I mean, obviously
it's always
the wines are frighteningly consistent normally. I mean, they are. They really are.
And let's point out that a lot of other people did taste very positively.
I think I just did do that, but anyway, carry on.
Yeah, sorry, well done. On the whites, I would like to say I didn't dislike them. I did like them, but actually, Haut-Brion Blanc. If you're a fan of that, this is definitely a vintage to buy because they've come out as the least expensive.
And it's a great vintage.
It is vintage whites, absolutely.
I would not, and I keep saying this every year, and I think the Clarté, which is something of a unique wine in that, not that you can be something of a unique wine, but it's a combined second wine in terms of it being La Mission and Haut-Brion's white wine sort of second wine, and I actually really like it, and I've had it quite a few vintages now, and I think given the expertise that goes into the Haut-Brion and the La Mission and how small the quantities are across all 3 whites, I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah. Just on the pricing of the whites, Haut-Brion Blanc comes in at the cheapest in the market, as far as I can see, which is great and where it should be. And given that it's of very good quality in 24, I think that's a buy in my book. Mission Haut-Brion Blanc, for some reason, is
less.
Yeah, I mean it's far less well priced, which is a strange decision. But so there we go. There's a bit of a split in those two.
But I find that year in year out, actually, Haut-Brion tends to be the better price than the Miss. Let's move forward onto other releases that came out. Ausone is another big name that has come out, 921 for 3. For me, Nev, your thoughts there?
Yeah, look, I think Ausone it just about kind of works, but I would just urge people really to just have a think about, is this an estate that you follow? If it is, then I think it absolutely does work. But in terms of potentially a new foray into an estate is 24 the one to jump in at? I would say probably perhaps not. I mean, I'll admit, Ausone is a property that I sort of admire more than love. Personally, it's clearly of exceptional quality, but I have sort of generally consistently found them to be sort of deeply impressive, but not sort of a style that moves me, and that is a purely personal.
You're saving yourself a bit of money by not being
yeah. I am.
We should applaud them for what they've done, though. They've come
out
at the right price.
Yeah, totally. No, exactly.
And if you go back to the kind of prices that wine was in 9 and 10 and things, they've come off a massive amount. I think and I'm going to sound like sort of a broken record, but if you compare it to its neighbour, which you can do with Carmo Brion and Clarence, or we just did, you know, Bel Air Monange next door at 560 a 6 versus 900 and something a 3.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, obviously, us wine merchants are terribly badly paid. That's why you have to keep buying wine from us. But that's where I'd be spending my money.
Yeah, I think so. But no, I mean, look, Ozone, as you say, like it's good to see people listening to the market, and I think that's definitely to be applauded. But
yeah. So two other sort of big names from Saint-Emilion have come out today and yesterday, which is Figeac and Pavie. So Figeac, at 564 for 6 bottles. Again, we didn't taste Figeac, unfortunately, and we didn't taste Pavie, so we can't really comment on the two from a quality Corny and Barrow tasting note point of view. On the decision on what they've done, I mean, Pavie slightly edges it. That came within our fair, as you know, with certain wines, we put a recommended buy price. Pavie came out well within that. Figeac slightly above, and you can sort of, the lesser vintages that a lot of them have been compared to in terms of 17 and 21, you can sort of pick up for slightly less.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Figeac's an interesting one. They went slightly tonto last year.
They did
in their price, and especially in terms of not coming down massively on, as my memory says, right, on 22. And Figeac is a wine, I think it's fair to say, everyone wants to love, like Cheval, and obviously that makes sense. But I think they've had a big come down in terms of percentage. Maybe it's not quite been enough, but I'm quite encouraged by it, and I would have thought the wine was pretty good.
From a very high base, though. I mean, they've been an extreme example of yo-yoing prices. 22 was hugely expensive. 23 came down quite a lot, and 24's gone down quite a lot. But it's still not quite enough, maybe.
No, yeah, and that's it. That's the danger, isn't it? Yeah,
very big shade.
Make your bed.
Very big shade to pay for.
I think though as well is that like Figeac, I think one of the reasons it's sort of it's toing and froing with a bit of an identity crisis a little bit. Not crisis, probably absolutely the wrong word, but
I know what you mean. Though.
I think Figeac is unquestionably, along with Cheval Blanc, one of the most, and Bel Air Monange, frankly, one of the most exciting estates to follow in Saint-Emilion at the moment in terms of at the tip top end of the appellation. There's some very talented people there who have produced, arguably some of the greatest wines that the estate has produced in the last 5 years, and they want to sort of capitalize on that reputation. And I understand that, but I think, this is, as Guy said, this yo-yoing between 22 and 24 is just a little bit of, you've got to read the market that's in front of you. Yeah, exactly.
We've also had Troplong come out, so that's. I mean, I'm sort of tempted to say the least amount of airtime, the better on that one, really. I mean,
it's look, they've had a massive change. They were one of the sort of Parker babes, if you like, in terms of the style. It used to be, a sort of stand your spoon up in it. Amérique de Gironde has come over the Gironde from Cos to there back in 2017. So I think there is not an identity crisis. There is a new identity. And they've done what they've done, but it's tricky unless you're incredibly loyal. It's tricky to understand the price.
There's a shift in terms of the people at the helm and the style and all of that stuff. And I mean, it's great what they're doing, but it's quite a lot more expensive than the 2020, for example. So I mean, it's quite hard to.
They're very much in the camp. Yeah, they're very much in the camp where at the moment they don't seem to be too fussed about what they're coming out. If they're not making the right sounds, which is going to appease the market, they aren't too bothered. I mean, Amérique Gironde came out and said something about the vintage. Well, we have natural density within our grapes, so we felt that the wine was of a certain quality that we didn't need to come down enough. And I'm just thinking, come on, that's just read the room.
Yeah, no, indeed. But I do think on the Pavie front, I do think as a property that's clearly of very high quality, that has, in my opinion, got it wrong for pricing wise for several years in a row.
Yep.
To see them re-enter the space and read the market correctly is a good thing.
Fair point.
Yeah. So,
and I think that deserves a mention.
Going to the other end of the scale, then that sort of lovely earlier drinking, great value wines. We've got a good coin flip here because one side we've got Cantenac Brown coming out at £171 a 6, and a wine that we we quite enjoyed, actually. We thought it was a good wine they made in 24.
Yep.
To come out of that, you know, because there's a lot of people will sort of say, and understandably, when we're talking to them in Bordeaux, you know, of certain estates, and this is in the Gauche as well, if you're a small operation, it's harder for you to be able to sort of really sacrifice your margins. You've got less to play with, less meat on the bone.
Your fixed costs, your fixed costs.
Yeah. So, you know, they can't come out too low, but some have in this year. And I really applaud that because they've decided, actually, no, we've got to make the right move. And so Cancelap Brown is one of them. So certainly consider that if you're looking for some Margaux of good quality.
They've been very, very well reviewed this year as well.
Yeah.
We liked it.
We did.
And it seems that most people have liked it as well. So that's a recommendation.
But the other side of the coin, which doesn't feel that, which is actually one of the fewest estates that's gone up in price, is Felin Segur. So I have no idea what's going on there. I mean, it's a wine that we've always quite liked, but I mean, over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, we've probably fallen away.
I mean, we followed it quite heavily from 03 through to about 10 and 11.
Yeah.
We were big takers, and it was one of the ones I bought in Magnum for my son's sort of 2001 vintage, things like that. So emotionally, we've got quite strong ties to it. And Veronique there's brilliant. They have done a very good job, and I have no doubts that the wine actually is increasingly on the up and up and up. But yeah, it's not really a time to do that. I still don't think the wine for the price is the bad thing, but it's the market sort of mentality, really.
Well, what about their neighbour Clarence Dillon? That's a different story.
It is a different story. So yeah, they and you know, I don't mean this in a derogatory way. Obviously, have a slightly bigger following, a bigger reputation, and they've decided to actually no, yeah, we will come out and we'll come out at a good price. So £360 for 6 bottles. Callan went through a big phase of releasing at a very compelling price, and
they've done a massive amount of replanting there. So I'm not totally sure when. And again, this is not positive or negative; it's just a fact that they did do a lot of replanting. So I don't know when the new replantings sort of come on stream, but I think that £60 for Clarence Dillon at the quality it's been of late, I think seems a very fair price.
Seems very fair to me. It's more than a third cheaper than the 2020. It's it's good.
Producing some fabulous wines at the moment. It's not an easy place to make wine.
Bordeaux Rose, pretty much the end of it all.
Right on the tip up there, kudos.
Yeah.
And then we'll finish on one from today. We're recording this on Thursday, mid-morning, and that's Leoville Poyferré, 286 A6. And so they have followed the metric of coming out. What is the cheapest available?
I mean, this definitely strikes me when it comes to looking at the end of the campaign and maybe picking up a few 6-packs. I think this is pretty high up my list on the left bank at the moment. I think under £600 a dozen for a second growth that is pretty consistent, can be nicely a little bit more hedonistic than some, and it has a nice big drinking window. You can keep it, but you also don't need to be crazy patient.
Well,
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, interesting. I was looking at my tasting notes. So which
sort of person?
Not character. No, but I was going to say this is one that I think.
Did you compare it to?
Well, this is one that I think actually will require a bit of patience from 24, because I found quite serious structure when I tasted it, but in a very positive way, because I sort of said, look, there's a real serious concentration of fruit that laps in, and there's a real feel of depth which you don't get in many of these 24s. It's chunky, but one of the better balanced with it. So I do feel, I think that's one. If you are looking for some 24 to sort of stick away, then that's a candidate for me.
Yeah, I put in my note that it pulled no punches, but it's characterful. I mean, it's got proper stuffing. I think the temptation in 24 was to kind of rein back on the extraction to the point where sometimes you feel the wines are lacking stuffing. We were talking about donut wines, weren't we? Mm. But this is the opposite extreme, I think. But in a good sense, they've really gone for it. But it's characterful. It's good wine.
Yeah, okay, yeah. We'll call it the Evander Holyfield. It doesn't pull any punches, doesn't take any chunks out.
So. It's got a bit of an aim missing.
Yeah. So I think that brings us sort of up to date.
Although, interestingly, we must, and we'll talk about it next week in our next one of these, but we're going to have one of my favourite wines year on year, Trotanoy, coming out next week. It's an exclusivity, and Trot, as we love to call it, is for me is always right out. It's like the ultimate high end insiders wine, and I'm looking forward to releasing that next week.
One of the greatest Pomerols there is.
Yeah. Pomerol's Pomerol.
I don't think you can understand Pomerol at all, frankly, unless you've had a a foretaste of Trot.
Well, I
I'll
look
go
forward
that
to
far.
getting you in and delving a bit more into that box, Mr. Kirkpatrick. Lovely. Brilliant. Okay, well, I'll see you out. I didn't do the intros, but Nev, Guy, and Will, you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me, Joseph.
Cheerio.